So, just broadly speaking, why would you say that there's a need for young people to participate in elections and beyond elections? And in particular, why would you say it's important for young people to vote?
Because I think we have a beautiful history in our country of young people being able to rise up against a state they didn't agree with, of young people being able to stand up for their own education, as we can recall in the 76 riot. But equally so, young people face today a similar and a more difficult crisis, in that young people are unemployed. 65% of them can't find work. Their education system isn't delivering what they'd like to be. And I think without fail, we're at a point in our lives where acknowledging our history and our heritage, it's critical that we express that through the ballot today, where we can say we can choose a government of our own liking and our future is at stake. And so I think it's vital that young people own that, and they do, to be able to say to themselves that we live in a South Africa that is of their own making, and therefore they have the right to put their mark on that chapter. And then more critically, just the privilege. I remember the first time I voted and how memorable that was and how important that was. And I think for young people today, they have a right to choose leaders of their own right, And I look at young leaders, I look at my own self as a young South African, being able to stand up and say, I get to contribute to the story of this country, and a young person's vote certainly can add to that.
And in terms of the economy, as you say, so 65% of young people can't find work. Youth unemployment has stagnated at over 50% for more than a decade. Economically speaking, what kind of failures do you see in the current regime, and how would you adapt those policies? And what kind of credible economic policies and change would you implement to solve those problems?
We live in very interesting times. I think truly as South Africans we've entered, I think it's a global context really, in a space where nations are grappling with the pragmatism of what they need to do. Our economy in South Africa suffers from multiple variables. The first one is, I think our economy is inefficient. In other words, when a person wants to start their business, as an argument's sake, it takes them far too long. When goods are being delivered in this country, it takes them too long to get from the coastline into the inland. It is inefficient in that even our own model of taxation, when you introduce things like e-tolling, they render an inefficient way for people to be able to be economically viable. So if you're a foreign investor and you were thinking, how am I going to put money in this country? You would think to yourself, well, I've got to pay tax to the government. But now, additional to that tax, I've got to pay a different tax for using the roads. So when there are inefficiencies that are locked into your system like that, they create a climate that is unhealthy for people to want to invest. I mean, the other critical problem is that our economy does not share equity. So we're not employing all the resources in this country. We've really entered into a space of insiders and outsiders. There are some who own components of the wealth in this country, while so many are left out of it. And then I think the most critical thing is that our economy is unstable. I mean, I think we can talk, there's no doubt about the tragedy of Marikana and what that meant. But it comes out of a backdrop of a chronic challenge of labor unrest and labor relations in the workplace. What that simply means is that when you think about it from an investment point of view, no, not many investors can tell you what the labor cost will be in South Africa progressively. So in many ways, we behave like a country who's not competing for business. And then there's no question about the fact that our economy has truly entered into a space where many call it stagflation. So we have high inflation, there's an increase in the cost of goods, but our economic growth is stagnant. When you compound those problems and then you add the cocktail of corruption, where in fact you feel like certain people are being favored at the expense of others, you render a business climate that cannot work. And this is where an ideological point of departure is that our view is that, of course, you can have a market-based economy that in fact does not take away from the fact that government must intervene in favoring the least. But it's a mixed type of economy that is led by markets. So we've got to make it easy for South Africa to behave like a country competing for business. You think about other nations, whether it be Malaysia, whether it be whatever. Economies that are growing behave like that. They start to make it easy for people to invest in that country. They make it easy for people to start their businesses. We've got to do the same. They make sure that no one business is favored through processes of corruption. So there is a legitimate process that must say to us, we must be market driven. We must create a state that is capable of taking whatever the market dictates to be able to invest into communities that are not. So in other words, if your state has incapacity, and those are perpetuated by cadre deployment or are perpetuated by just incompetence in the state system, you can't then be able to deliver on your mandate. My view is that we must allow South Africans to own their own businesses. My preference would that those businesses be in fact black so that you can increase the equity into that. We must increase efficiencies. We must make sure we deal away with double taxation and models. And then make sure that when we can achieve economic growth, at 8% we'll be able to halve unemployment.